The most important function of Congress is to pass laws. In order to do that more effectively, Congress created a committee system. In this file, we're going to take a look at that committee system and how it factors into the legislative process in Congress. Committees are where most of the real work of Congress is accomplished. In each two-year session of Congress, approximately 10,000 bills are submitted in the House and Senate. These bills are referred to committees for prioritization. The most important type of committee, the standing committees, which persist from one session of Congress to the next, are defined by specialized subject matter, with each committee handling a different area of policy. By adopting a committee structure to get most of its work done, Congress uses this system to achieve multiple purposes. First, the committee system creates a structure of competent policymaking. In other words, by assigning members of Congress to standing committees with specific subject matter concerns, the committee system allows members of Congress to develop specializations in the lawmaking process, gaining a deeper knowledge about the subject matters of concern to the committees they serve on. The committee structure also streamlines executive branch oversight. So, for instance, if there's a food contamination outbreak, members of the agriculture committees in Congress will call high-ranking officials in the Department of Agriculture to come testify at an oversight hearing and explain why the outbreak occurred, what's being done to stop it, and what the department is doing to prevent similar outbreaks in the future. Additionally, the committee system allows Congress to more efficiently process a huge workload. Because of the committee structure, Congress can be working on multiple big-ticket items at the same time. For instance, the tax writing committees can be working on tax reform, the health committees can be working on health insurance law, and the transportation committees can be working on an infrastructure bill to fund new transportation projects. The idea here is that it sort of allows Congress to walk and chew gum at the same time. Finally, the committee system allows members of Congress to focus on issues of particular importance to themselves and their constituents. A good example of how the committee system encourages specialization can be seen with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Before being elected to Congress, he served in the Air Force as a judge advocate and later as a private lawyer. His committee assignments fit his background areas of expertise, particularly the Armed Services and Judiciary Committees. Also, note that within the Armed Services Committee, he serves on 3 even more specialized subcommittees. The Strategic Forces Subcommittee is one with particular importance for South Carolina. This subcommittee oversees the United States' nuclear arsenal, including environmental management programs related to nuclear facilities like the Savannah River site, an energy department facility that employs over 10,000 people just a few miles down the road from Aiken. Through his subcommittee assignment, Senator Graham is able to serve his constituents by having a larger say in the management of a facility that employs a large number of South Carolinians. This is a pretty common example of how the committee system allows for both policy specialization and substantive representation. One of the most important things to know about committees is the powerful role played by committee chairs. A majority of members on every committee in Congress come from the majority party in the chamber as a whole, and the committee is always chaired by a member of the majority party. Committee chairs have a great deal of control over the agenda of their committees. It is up to their discretion to schedule hearings and other committee work. They manage committee staff and resources. They act as floor managers, meaning they set the strategy for how the majority party will debate the bill when it reaches the full chamber. And they strategize which bills in their committee to take action on and which to ignore. And they also appoint all the chairs of the subcommittees. For much of the 20th century, the power of committee chairs was immense. Tradition held that the longest-serving majority party member on a committee would be chairperson. This meant that the chairperson remained the same until they retired, lost re-election, or their party lost the majority in the chamber. This allowed powerful chairs to carve out their own policy fiefdoms, where they could basically proceed however they wished, even when it conflicted with the desires of party leadership. This became a particularly strong point of contention in the 1950s and 1960s, as a group of Southern Democratic committee chairs known as the Old Bulls used their chairmanships to bottle up civil rights bills that they opposed. Over the last several decades, a number of limits have been placed on committee chairs to reduce their independence and make sure they adhere more closely to the party platform. The seniority rule is still a guiding principle, but is no longer the determinative factor for who gains the position. Instead, committee chairs are limited to a 6-year term. They have to interview with party leaders for the position, pledging to support the party position and agreeing to substantial efforts to help raise money for the party's campaign fund. Okay, so now let's place the work of congressional committees in the broader context of the legislative process. In other words, how a bill becomes a law. You might be familiar with the basic steps, but I'm going to lay out the process in a bit of detail here, just to give you a sense of the gauntlet that has to be run to get any piece of legislation successfully passed into law. The first step in the process is the introduction of a bill. A bill can only be introduced by a member of the House or Senate. Once introduced, the presiding officer assigns the bill to a committee. Out of 10,000 bills introduced in the House or Senate every 2 years, this is the last step for an overwhelming majority of bills. They simply die in committee with no further action. However, some bills do get further action, in which case the committee chair refers them to subcommittee. From there, the real action starts. The subcommittee holds hearings. This is a really critical step for fleshing out the bill. Subject matter experts are called to testify at the hearings about the effects the bill would have, and supporters and opponents of the bill make their cases before the subcommittee. This is an important stage for understanding what important groups are in favor of the bill and which are opposed, and for understanding what might be some particularly problematic or controversial portions of the bill that might need changes made before moving forward. After holding hearings, the subcommittee engages in what's called markup. This is where the subcommittee meets and goes through the bill line by line, proposing and voting on potential changes to the bill. Once the subcommittee has finished its markup, the bill is reported back to the full committee. Once the full committee gets the bill, it will oftentimes repeat the steps of the subcommittee, holding another round of hearings and conducting a markup session of the full committee. At that point, if a majority of the members of the committee are happy with the bill, the committee will report the bill out of committee, meaning it's ready for consideration by the full chamber. Very few bills actually make it this far in the process, but those that do usually stand a pretty good chance of passage into law because they've demonstrated a fair amount of support and momentum to make it this far. Once a committee reports out a bill in the Senate, that bill is scheduled for floor debate with unanimous consent. Unanimous consent means just that. In order to make it onto the schedule, every single senator must consent. A single senator can hold up consideration of a bill, at least for a while, by threatening a filibuster. Now, if it's just one senator who's gumming up the works for idiosyncratic reasons, ultimately that senator's filibuster can be overcome with a supermajority vote of 60 senators to move forward despite the filibuster. However, and the more usual case, if the filibuster is part of an organized strategy of a substantial minority of senators, usually when the minority party is unified in opposition to a bill, then they can sustain a filibuster indefinitely and prevent the bill from even coming up for consideration on the floor of the Senate. If, on the other hand, we're talking about a bill that's been reported out of committee in the House, the bill is then sent to the powerful Rules Committee. The custom in the House is for each bill to receive a special rule that details specifically how it will be considered on the House floor. That special rule details how long debate will last and which amendments, if any, will be allowed votes. Once a bill makes it to the floor of the House or Senate, it usually succeeds. During floor action, members of the chamber debate the bill, amendments are offered, and a final vote is taken. Sometimes the House and Senate are working on similar bills simultaneously. Other times, it's more sequential, with one chamber acting first and then sending the bill to the other chamber for consideration. Either way, in the end, the House and Senate must pass identical versions of a bill for it to become law. If different versions are passed, then a conference committee, made up of both senators and representatives, is appointed to resolve the differences between the chambers' bills. Once both chambers of Congress have passed identical versions of the bill, it then moves to the President. At this stage, generally one of two things happens. The President usually either signs the bill, meaning it becomes law, or the President will veto the bill, meaning it will not become law, unless Congress is able to override the veto. A veto can only be overridden with a 2/3 supermajority in both the House and the Senate, something that occurs only about 5% of the time. The presidential veto is a very strong power. The big takeaway from this whole process is that it's extremely hard for a bill to become a law. In the current Congress, which is nearing its end, only 245 bills have been enacted into law, out of over 12,000 bills introduced. And many of these bills are very narrow in scope or ceremonial, such as renaming federal buildings to honor particular people. For a bill of substance to become law, it requires agreement to proceed at several stages. It generally requires the support of party leaders, committee and subcommittee chairs in both chambers, the support of a majority of members in each chamber, as well as the support of the President. This is a process that demands consensus building and incremental change. American government has a very strong status quo bias by design. This system of incremental legislation has slowed to an even greater crawl in recent years, as the increasing polarization between the two major parties has made consensus building even harder to come by.